Coming up, should talking about dongles get you fired? T-Mobile says no to annual contracts and yes to the iPhone. BioShock Infinite, is this the video game equivalent of high art? What's a digital native and do they really know anything? All that and more on this episode of Downloaded. Hey, welcome to Downloaded. This is the show where we gather the most opinionated voices in the tech field today, focus all that energy on the stories that are impacting the tech world. I am your host, Jim Lauterbach. Joining me today, glad to have Seth Rosenblatt back, senior editor from CNET, and Mike Issac, a senior editor also at All Things D, two of my favorite sites for tech stuff out there. Let's move on to the first story. This is a really interesting story just breaking right now. A kind of a spam spat, kind of what I called it. There was this company, Spam House, that went in and these guys create blacklists of domains for folks say, this domain, they're spammers, don't let them into your email system. They picked a couple of companies that were hosted at this place called Cyberbunker in the Netherlands somewhere, and apparently some people there got somewhat upset, unleashed the mother of all denial of service attacks, 300 billion bits per second, taking the internet down. Seth, this is a pretty serious story, right?
Absolutely, and one of the great things about it that I absolutely love is that the bad guys and the good guys have the wrong names. Spam House, you think, would be
the spammers,
the
right?
Spammers, and Cyberbunker sounds like they're really into security. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Cyberbunker is a bunch of lunatics, I think is the technical term, for these people.
Lunatics.
Yeah, they're sitting in the Netherlands in an old NATO bunker, 5 stories tall. They've resisted the Dutch police. I don't know what that says about the Dutch police, but in any event,
so they need more tanks.
Yeah, they need something, some kind of weaponry. And they're sitting there, and they believe that because they do not host any child pornography and no terrorism, that they are fit to host spam bots. And so they are one of the world's biggest spam bot centers. Spam House, as you said, went after them, and Cyberbunker retaliated by basically taking down various chunks of the entire internet at random.
Yeah, I mean, people couldn't access Netflix. There was a bunch of other stuff going on. The spam question at large, I think, Mike, is an interesting one as well. I mean, Bill Gates said, famously, along with some of the other famous things that he's said, that, the spam problem will be wiped out in a couple of years. It's probably 10 years ago. Spam, are we ever going to see the end of spam?
I mean, I still get quite a bit of spam, honestly.
And it seems to be increasing.
I mean, like every sort of different, filtering program that comes out, for me at least, there's always stuff that sort of floats through. There's always sort of things. I really like the idea, though, of like internet vigilantes sort of like coming against each other and just like taking it upon themselves to sort of like, okay, we're gonna totally wipe you out. I don't know, it's scary at the same time because then you get into like, I don't know, Reddit hive mind mentalities and,
It's an interesting battle, right?
Well, it really sort of gets at the core of internet culture at the moment. We're sort of, at least when it comes to spam and DDoS and threats like that, we're at this fulcrum where we can continue doing what we're doing, where culture that has supported people doing whatever they want to do, as long as it's not patently illegal, like child pornography and terrorism, continue doing what they're doing, or we change the way that we do things. This could mean changing the way that the internet works, because the only way to stop a DDoS attack of this size is to basically change the domain name server system.
Well, and you're exactly right. I mean, look, the way that this works is that anybody can go after these, like, basically library cards that are centrally serviced where all the addresses map to all the other addresses. Can we even do that, though? I mean, that sounds like you'd have to rip out all the wires and put all the stuff back in.
I believe it would be an extremely large project.
I mean, the internet is inherently fragile.
Yes. Absolutely.
And if these guys, just a bunch of guys in a bunker somewhere in the northern part of the Netherlands, could be the southern part of the Netherlands, but it's a very small country, can take down portions of the internet, what's to say that next time they don't take down a lot more and we all end up going back to flashcards?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah. Again, the inherent fragility of the internet, spam sucks, but the internet itself, I think, is at risk. I don't know, Mike, is there anything that you think we could do?
I mean, kind of like you said, like how are you going to, how do you sort of undertake changing the entire infrastructure of what we're kind of used to? I've sort of like I think we've all sort of like adapted to spam and things like that as just like a part of what we have to deal with, being in sort of like the age we're in. So I don't know. I mean, I don't see it changing.
Well, look, the next story I think is interesting. It sort of doesn't really follow along with it. That's another issue that I think technology has gotten a lot further away from our ability to actually deal with the changes. And this is around something that happened at the Python Dev Conference over the weekend. Very interesting story.
Dongle-gate, right?
Dongle-gate.
Is that the official?
So, a couple guys in the audience, there's a picture of them up here, were doing some off-color jokes apparently about dongles and forking. Forking, for you non-programmers, is when you take a piece of code and you move it in two different directions and it goes one way and then the other. They were, may have been talking in sexual references around forking. They certainly were around dongles. Dongles, those little things that attach to the back of your computer, USB or serial port to enable certain things to happen. They were using a different version of the term dongle. A attendee in front of them was insulted, snapped a picture of them, and then tweeted out and said that they were doing things that weren't cool and basically outed them in a very public way. Mike, this is pretty passive aggressive, isn't it?
I think that essentially what happened is like everyone sort of overreacted at the same. I mean, like, granted, there are things you can and can't say these days that people are very sensitive to. But at the same time, to take a picture of someone like immediately without, from what I understand, that she didn't even talk to the guys or something.
Yeah, she didn't even talk to them.
Well, one of the other things is that, and I am a big proponent of people who encounter situations like this, standing up for themselves and talking either to the guys or talking to the organizer of the conference,
right?
whatever.
Yeah.
But it turns out that on top of all this, she's actually she was the head of developer outreach.
Yeah.
So what does it mean when the person who's in charge of your developer outreach doesn't actually know how to reach out to developers who are potentially causing problems? That, I think, says much more about her. They acted like adolescents, which is a terrible thing, in a professional environment. But
I was going to say, I will say that, like, in her defense, maybe she just didn't feel like she was in the environment that she could say something. Like if you're in a developer conference with like a bunch of dudes around you with saying sort of like these dongle jokes or something like that, it might be like, okay, maybe I don't feel like I would get that sort of like feedback from someone.
I don't know. I'm looking at the picture of these guys. They don't look like the kind of guys who are going to bust your head for saying, "Hey guys, cut down on
Chill
the
out.
jokes, guys."
Yeah.
this was a no-win story.
Well,
So
I know
everyone
when
got fired too, right?
Well, she got fired, as you said.
She got fired. One of
One
them
of the
got
developers
fired.
got fired.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
It's funny because I think the companies Playhaven and SendGrid were the two companies that these folks worked at. I think they're the ones who overreacted as well. I mean, like, it's a little Twitter spat that just went totally out of control. And there may have been extenuating circumstances, but I still think they just went way out.
Yeah, their defense was like, okay, these guys, or the guy had it coming already in terms of why he got fired, or there were other things that were going on. But I think it was just like, we need to control PR spin immediately, so we're going to can this dude, and then...
Which just made it even worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Ken Fisher over at Ars Technica, I've got his story up right here, did a really nice opinion piece on how really everybody lost at this.
Yeah.
I think even the guys at the Python Dev Conference, they don't want to be raked through the press talking about how people are making off-color jokes.
Yeah.
They'd rather be talking about the cool things people are doing with Python, right? So I think they lose too. What could the conference have done? Could they have stepped in and diffused this as it started to develop?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think absolutely. But that would have required one or the other of the actors in this to have gone to the conference and talked to them about it. It turns out that I can't remember the woman's last name, Adria Roberts,
Richardson.
Richardson, yeah. She actually has a somewhat of a history of not going to conference organizers when there are problems. And
at the same time, I mean, it's like, there's so many people there.
yeah.
How are you going to get someone to come in and say,
Richards.
okay. How are you going to get someone to come in and say, please stop? I just think at some point you have to deal with this sort of thing yourself.
Well, look, and Twitter is the best place in the world for if you want to complain about something and let the world know.
Passive
just put it on Twitter. I mean, I'm guilty of that all the time.
Yeah, totally.
So, all right. So, real quickly, you're sitting in an audience. Something like this happens that you disagree with. Not you, but let's say, what's your recommendation for people to do if they're confronted with a situation like this?
Yeah. I think I just like common sense would necessitate. I think of it as like a movie theater, right? If some dude behind me is talking and bothering me, I'm gonna like turn around and give him a look or say, hey, I'm trying to, watch this here.
Right.
At the same time, if it gets to the next level, then you go to the organizers.
Seth, what do you think? How should it have been handled?
same way. I mean, I have been in situations where I've turned around and said, TFSU, and either that works or it doesn't.
Did that work?
I didn't start with that. But you know, there's sort of I think it speaks to a larger problem on the internet of misogyny from commenters and from people who feel that they are anonymous in one way or another. I've seen this on CNET. We've ran a number of stories in the past year of instances at DEF CON and other situations where women are being, you know, verbally abused or worse, and that's just, I mean, there's no reason for that stuff. But it's important for people who see this happening to stand up and say, hey, this is not cool. Yeah, it's one thing to stand up and say, hey, this is not cool, and it's another to go straight to the public with it. And you know, you can't go right to your H-bomb. You always have to, start off with mediation, and then if mediation doesn't work,
then you assured destruction, which is what this turned into.
Right. Then you escalate, but you have to escalate in a rational manner, and that doesn't seem like that happened here at all.
You bring up something with DevCon, and I think that we saw the same thing here, and it is a case where you have a woman. And I'm sure I wasn't at the Python conference. We've all been at tech conferences where there are a much smaller proportion of women than there are men. There is definitely a comfort and uncomfort factor, and I think I would give her a little bit of slack because of that. I mean, it's tough, right? And there was another woman, or a girl actually on stage, I guess, and I could see how the frustration of being a woman in what is a very male-dominated world and just boiling over inside of her mind. I'm not saying that I agree with her behavior, but I think that we have to cut her a little slack.
No, fully. I completely agree.
Absolutely.
I think that, like, it's funny, too, because most of the commentators on this have been male. Like, right, it's a bunch of guys right here sort of talking about it. And so I was happy to see at least a few of the sort of, female opinions come out on how they feel just in this setting overall, not just tech, but like in these little conferences as well.
But I think you guys are right. It is something where you just need to reach out and talk to people. And I mean, even on an airplane, I've gotten to the point where if I'm on a plane and I want to put my seat back, I'll turn around and say, do you mind if I put my seat back?
Oh, you're nicer than I am.
You're that guy.
But that's the right thing to do,
right? Yeah. I do hate the people in front of me.
Right, exactly. So we all hate that. So just a little bit of communication, all of us. We're also good at communicating on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, I'm not sitting in front of you on an airplane, by the way, or behind you. So let's move on to our next story about T-Mobile. T-Mobile yesterday, a nice follow-along on all things D at the event where they're doing away with contracts.
Yep.
And they're saying, no more like, we'll give you a cell phone for free or for $100, and you got for 2 years you're locked in. Say, month to month, but you got to buy your phones, and you got to buy your phones either outright or you can pay a little bit of money, and then they're on sort of layaway plan. First of all, what do you guys think of this? Is it the right thing for phone companies to do? Seth, let's start with you.
I don't think it goes far enough.
Really? Where should they take it?
I think how they do it in Europe is actually the way to go. And that's something that a lot of people have said.
That.
Where, I don't know if I can explain it accurately enough, but basically where you're paying for... Actually, when you guys want to jump in? Because
I'll help you a little bit, because this is a lot more like what you do in Europe. Yeah. In Europe, you buy your own phone. You can move it from service to service. Unfortunately, I mean, these are the first guys. So in Europe, you may have 3, 4, 5 providers, 3 or 4, who all use GSM.
Right.
Problem in the U.S. is we only have 2 that use GSM, which are T-Mobile and AT&T. So theoretically, you can move from T-Mobile to AT&T, but you can't move to Verizon, you can't move to Sprint if you buy that phone. So a little bit different here. And AT&T, of course, doesn't offer this kind of service really at this level either. But I agree. Definitely a good way to go. I wish everybody did. What do you think, Mike?
I think it's going to be really hard for just consumers to get over the barrier of so the subsidy up front didn't bother people as much locking them into the contract. They sort of like, okay, I don't have to pay $800 to get this phone, right? I'm only paying $200. So they didn't do all the math of this is going to cost me much more in the long term. I don't know if just like mom or dad on the street is going to really be like, why am I paying $800 now? Why can't I just go over to Verizon and get this other thing?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I also think T-Mobile is not making it any easier. I'm a T-Mobile customer. Yeah. I've got 2 other users at home, so we're 3 users, and I'm spending about $140 a month on T-Mobile, and so I went up and I wanted to make the change. Yeah. I heard about the story. I'm like, I'm going to go do it. We own all our phones. I bought a Nexus. So basically, we have nothing under contract. I went through the whole process. And it ended up giving me a credit that it shouldn't have given me, and it wouldn't let me do it. And I had to call them up, and the guys didn't know what they were talking about. And then it was like 2 or 2.5. So in the end, and look, I'm a little bit of a geek, right? I understand this stuff probably better than at least some people.
Yeah.
Not better than you guys, but most people out there. I ended up, I did end up saving about $25 a month as I went through it. So that's pretty cool. It's $300 a year,
All right.
$600. Now this is for 3 lines, right? But still, and I got more. I now have unlimited voice. I have unlimited text. I had unlimited text. The data upped a little bit. So I think it's a good thing, but you're right. It's going to be confusing for consumers. And the T-Mobile guys on the phone, they don't know what they're talking about either.
Yep. Yep. Well, I mean, the other part too is like how many people. I always, when the unlocking sort of debate comes into question, I'm always wondering how many people are really disturbed by being sort of secured into a two-year contract, right? Like how many people are sort of buying phones with the express intent that I can unlock this, I can move to any sort of carrier. I don't think the masses
people think
want
like that.
Right.
But if you could, I mean, I think for a lot of people, they don't even know what their service is going to be like until they get that phone and they take it to their home and they see how it functions. It turns out they're in the family room a lot, or they're in their study a lot, or wherever they are. Or maybe their house is made of a material that is blocking the signal partially. So
it's a really good point.
I think to be able to say, hey, you know what, we're not on a contract. I paid more for this phone outright, but I own the phone and I can take it where I want. I think that kind of portability is something that's really lacking in how we do things. And at the end of the day, it winds up benefiting consumers. I think until AT&T adopts something similar, or until the other GSM providers adopt something similar, it's going to be very hard for T-Mobile. But I think
we need
in the
more
short
of those
term,
pay-as-you-go plans that are cheaper. I mean, that's the cool thing about these plans. They really are cheaper.
Yeah.
Are
They really do save you money. How often do you change your phone?
Not often enough. I'm only on my second smartphone because the cost of getting in, I'm on Verizon and I have, I'm grandfathered in under an unlimited data plan. So especially with the way that we use more and more data, I don't want to give that up.
Right.
But it means that from now on, because Verizon went to their share everything last summer, I'm now locked in if I want to keep the unlimited data.
Yeah.
So I'm paying full price for phones anyway.
Yeah.
So even though up until this point I've only had an original Droid and a Droid Bionic, which is a terrible phone, in the near future I could easily see myself upgrading once a year, once every 6 months, depending on.
Go on
what's out
Craigslist.
there.
I found some good used phones on Craigslist, by the way. Just as an aside, if you want to get that Bionic out of your life. Mike, how often do you change your phone?
I have a 4S right here. I'm not like the kind of person who has to buy the iPhone 5 when it comes out. And I like jumping around back and forth between Android and iOS. So I would say every year or so, I like messing around.
Well, and it's interesting talking about the iPhone because that's the second part of the T-Mobile story, is that they are now will be selling the iPhone.
Yep.
iPhone 5, iPhone 4S or whatever coming to T-Mobile. I think the 5 is going to be $100 down.
Sure.
I mean, this sounds like saving for Christmas, right?
Yep.
It's $100 down in 24 payments, 24 monthly payments of a total of $579.
But this is actually a better move for Apple than it is even for T-Mobile. For Apple to get T-Mo, the most recent iPhone, means that they don't have to worry about people jailbreaking it to get it onto that network. And jailbreaking an iPhone is the only way that you can really expose your iPhone as an operating system to a vast number of security risks. The operating system remains extremely secure by and large.
Yeah, until you break it.
Until you jailbreak it.
Yeah, until you jailbreak it. All right, so the big question, T-Mobile is the third or fourth or whatever biggest phone provider here in the U.S. I mean, I like T-Mobile, I use it, but is this going to save T-Mobile?
See, that's a funny thing. Like, I was a T-Mobile subscriber, and then I switched over to Verizon after I got tired of. I live in the East Bay, so it's like slow over there. It's always wonky. But it's just funny to me to see Apple sort of press these really long. They have to buy. Essentially, they have these huge deals where they have to spend a ton of money. Sprint had to spend a ton of money to get the iPhone. I'm assuming T-Mobile probably had to spend a ton of money buying the iPhone. I don't know if it's going to return the type of, like investment. Their ROI is going to be sort of big enough to pull T-Mobile out of bleeding subscribers so fast.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think I like the idea of them doing this, do away with contracts, just go buy your phone.
Yeah.
Seth, what do you think? Is it going to save T-Mobile, or are they on that death spiral and they're done?
I don't know, man. I would say that the more aggressive that they get in attracting consumers, the better it is.
Yeah.
I think they're big enough at this point that they can withstand some short-term hits.
I mean, it's like what other they have to do something because they can't get bought by AT&T now, right? Like they don't have many more moves left.
Well, they just bought. Is it Metro PCS? I can't remember. They just bought one. They just bought one of those pay-as-you. Metro PCS. They just bought one of those pay-as-you-go companies. So they are doing things to expand their reach.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're still an outlier a little bit. So.
What do you guys think of Verizon buying them?
I think
incompatible networks.
No, so that Verizon could get a GSM footprint in the States.
That would be cool in theory, but antitrust would never let it happen because Verizon is the largest, right?
Yeah.
So it would never happen.
Let's move on to video games. Talk about the big video game news this week. BioShock Infinite comes out, and boy, was it a love fest on the internet.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was like the second coming of I don't know what, including our own Adam Cecil here at Rev3 Games, who did, by the way, a great piece, 10 minutes long, a wonderfully informed and intelligent piece about BioShock, which I'm showing a little bit of video right here. But you can go over to Rev3 Games on YouTube and watch it. But he was talking about how it was, it's got relating it to Waiting for Godot and Chinatown and
wow, really?
All the just morality stuff and right and wrong and the things you can do. And first of all, wow. Are video games, Seth, are video games now art?
Shouldn't we ask Roger Ebert that?
Well, what did Ebert say?
Recently, who knows? But I remember, I think at least a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, he sort of went on a notable rant against video games, saying that they were not art. Frankly, I think anything that you do that does not involve one of your four major functions for life, sleep, eating.
Do we know what they are?
Yeah.
You should know what they are.
Yeah, you better. Then it's art.
Yeah.
What is what we're doing, writing about this stuff art? It's not necessarily high art. It's very, disposable.
Well, us sitting here talking about this is art.
But, well, yeah, exactly.
Maybe not.
I don't know.
Maybe in the most
about that.
Warholian sense of the term. But in any event, so we've seen most famously is Star Wars, where Lucas decided after he made it that he was going to start bolting some of Joseph Campbell's bigger themes into it. Mm-hmm. And by the time that Empire Strikes Back came around, he sort of had this fleshed out. And is there a problem making pop art, accessible in a way to both larger themes and to a larger audience? I think that's what makes it work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think art, and there are a large number of, and you bring that every new form of media comes out and people say, that's not art, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, music, that's not art. I'm sure they thought that back in the days when Shakespeare was making his plays. That's a terrible example. Mike, I'm turning it over to you. Is this art? Because I'm getting myself in a corner right here. And I'm not going to get out, so you're taking over.
Maybe I'm like more conservative on my sort of definitions of what art is. I think that yes, it is expanding the sort of ways you can do storytelling, right? And you can sort of show younger generations of people different sort of plays on morality, different ways of sort of bringing a literary approach to a game. But at the same time, I don't know, man, it's like a Godot illusion, a Waiting for Godot illusion. I think that's a little... I'm stuffy, right? I think I like the classic form of cinema. I like the classic form of reading a book or something.
But we have to remember that every new major form of art that's come about, especially since the Industrial Revolution, has been criticized as being not art.
See, you said what I tried to say, but failed utterly. Exactly.
Screw Shakespeare.
But it's also also true.
He's great.
Yeah, right.
You both are. But yeah, I agree. So
checks in the mail.
You look at paintings, right? Yeah, and you look at a beautiful Renaissance painting, and the thing that it communicates to you. This video game, and none of us have played it, so by the way, we're all going after what we read and what we've seen. But this video game, if you listen to some of these reviewers, actually can convey a similar sort of depth of emotion and experience and understanding that you get from reading a classic book or looking at a classic painting.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's true. I think you can do that in this medium. Now, talk about the morality, I think that's really interesting, where there's a lot of exploration of right and wrong. At one point, your main character, you can either continue to hide and do something racist or expose yourself. it is Roger Chang, the producer, and I were talking about this before, and he said it's a relatively white guy approach to exploring racism. So, and I'm probably not characterizing him as well as I should, but it's very much of it's sort of a knee-jerk version of it, but still. Exploring morality in this sort of an environment, I think that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, well,
I think so.
you set up, I don't know if I agree with like you said, binaries, right? You're either racist or you're not. They're like obviously shades and things are very nuanced. But if you want to, I'm thinking of like an 8-year-old or something. Well, this might not be appropriate for an 8-year-old.
12-year-old.
A 12-year-old? Okay.
12-year-old.
If you, well, even 12-year-old, right? If you want to introduce like sort of simple concepts of right versus wrong, or like, racist versus not, or sexism, or things like that.
Yeah, or programmers at the Python conference.
Right, exactly.
That's what we need a video game of.
We had all play.
Dongle
Y'all got to
jokes?
play BioShock and then come back and talk to us.
But this is actually a long-standing problem in any kind of major artistic medium where you underestimate your audience at your own peril. If this game is aimed at 12-year-olds, I don't remember what you guys were like at 12, but I was thinking about stuff that, racism and all this other stuff. Those were issues that we talked about. We talked about all kinds of stuff like abortion, and we also talked about whatever the most popular movie was that weekend. But in our classes, this stuff was coming up in history classes, in our English class, in our lit class. So I think if you're aiming a game at 12-year-olds, to underestimate what a 12-year-old is capable of, especially now, I think that's a mistake.
By the way, I don't think they're aiming this. Well, they probably are aiming at 12-year-olds, but I assume it's got an M rating or at least a 2 rating.
Probably like
it's probably. Even though, by the way, my 13-year-old's been playing those games for like years. So. But that's more about me as a parent than anything else. But like right versus wrong this is not the first time we've explored that in a video game. Fable has done this in a fairly binary and almost cartoony way. But it's actually, I had my son playing Fable when he was 10 or 11, and I'm not sure it helped him with his morality, but it did let him explore the consequences of his behavior in a way that didn't require him going out and shooting BB guns at squirrels. So I think that's a good thing.
It's interesting. I would wonder the ratio of games like this that sort of explore these moral themes and how they sell versus, say, like a shooter like a Battlefield or a Call of Duty where all you do is just waste everyone.
Well, isn't that the brilliant thing about BioShock is that it is a shooter.
Right.
And you can go through the game and just just shoot your way through it and do the story. But you can also, you'll be confronted with this, but you may not even notice it. But you can also kind of, it's sort of by osmosis, get a little of it, but also explore it in more detail if you want to, which may be one reason, Seth, why everybody's talking up this is like the next best thing ever.
Sure.
Fusion. All right, so you're going to play it, Seth?
I have a video game problem, so...
Glad you're sitting over there. What's your problem?
I stay as far away as I can, in general. I mean, I would love to play.
You don't work?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to totally play it. I don't care. My boss will fire me, but I want to try it. Everyone has been talking about this game, so I have to try it.
Yeah, I didn't play the first two, though. So although they're not, isn't necessarily a sequel.
It's a little different.
It's a little different because it takes place underwater. It takes place in these floating islands. Although
you want to talk about art, actually, the first one is very sort of Art Deco themed. It's actually really, really gorgeous.
Well, the art direction on all of them, and I watched Adam Sessler's piece and it got into some of the art directions, and it's visually stunning and beautiful.
Right.
And it captures that 1920s, I think it's 1920s, that place and that piece really well. I am, however, not going to play it for a long time. Because if you look up here on screen, you'll see what I'm currently obsessed by now that the servers are working.
I was going to say, is that actually running now?
My SimCity City. I'm just going to play some more, you guys. Can you talk about the next story for me?
Sure.
I actually need to get back to the next story. So that was BioShock. That's another interesting blog post came out from a guy, Ryan Creighton, who's a blogger on, I think, Kotaku. And he wrote this, Gamasutra, on Gamasutra. The myth of the digital native. Now, digital native is a term that defines people who grew up with digital technology. Like my 13-year-old son will never know TV without a TiVo. First time we went to a hotel, it's like, why can't I pause TV?
Did he really do that?
But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, babies now who are so used to the iPad that they go up and push every screen and don't know why it doesn't work. He though said that digital natives that this isn't ageist and it's stupid and that it actually creates a lot of prejudices and we end up not teaching people the things that they need to know. Do you believe this whole digital native, is it something that makes sense, Seth, or is it a myth?
I think it's just another term. You're Gen X, you're Gen Y, they ran out of letters of the alphabets, they went to digital native. I don't know. I think a bigger issue is actually, and you would know better than I, not since I don't have kids and you do, but focusing on the education system and what kids are actually being taught, and are they being taught the things they know? Does it matter if it's in some kind of gamified environment, which is where everything seems to be moving right now? Does it matter if it's being done on an abacus? As long as they're learning, and as long as they're learning things that help them get through the world.
Yeah, your education statement is a good one, and you think about, to me, digitally native would mean that they know how to run a computer, plug a USB port in, maybe open up the computer and build it. Ryan brought up an example of teaches in a university setting, or maybe it's high school, where trying to get kids to use it like a zip folder. They didn't even know how to make a zip file, a zip folder, and and my son, it's like he comes to me, he's like, he doesn't know how to download stuff to his PC. I'm like, oh, come on, you're a geek, you play video games all day. So in some sense, he's saying that we are in fact limiting, and because we consider these guys digital native, we're not actually giving them the tools that they need to actually be in a digital world. Mike, do you buy that?
I mean, I guess I'm playing like Mr. Stodgy here, right?
It's okay.
Like,
it's all right.
No.
There's one in every crowd.
I think for someone who's like deals with technology and stuff like this, I am very. I like the sort of rudimentary, stuff that are very analog, right? You have to sort of start there, and then I think from there you can sort of expand your toolkit of stuff, right? And so like maybe I'll teach my kids that I don't have to create zip folders at some point, or something like that. And they're sort of like things that we have that are givens that you would eventually have to sort of teach them. But like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that stuff is as important as like changing a tire.
Right. I was actually going to go right to the car analogy. It's just like learning how to fix your car.
Yeah.
It was much more important in the past to know how to fix your car on your own. Now it's a great skill to have. Is it necessary to get through life?
Yeah, I don't know how to change my oil. I can change the tire, but actually I know how to do it. I just don't want to.
Or fix your fridge, or fix your toaster. Or how do you fix your fridge once it has an Android interface built into it? I mean, is that even?
That's not it. Why would I even want Android on my fridge? Is one thing, but
I can tell you when your milk is expired.
I think what
my problem is.
I'm not an Apple enthusiast either. BlackBerry maybe, but
yeah, there you go.
I think my problem is I play everything out to like
be made here.
doomsday scenarios where electricity is gone and we need to know how to do like regular everyday things, right? And I think that's sort of where we start.
So I do think, personally, on the whole digital native thing, I think there is a difference for people who've grown up with the digital technology, and it's part of their inherent, it's just what they do. But it doesn't mean that people who didn't grow up with that and aren't the quote unquote digital natives, they can be as deep or deeper into technology and have a deeper understanding of it and a use of it. I mean, look at the people using Facebook. I mean, Facebook, there's adopter sequencing. Right. And adopter sequencing, yeah, sure. People who are digitally native may be more likely to be innovators or early adopters in adopter sequencing, but everyone gets there. And like Facebook, everybody's on Facebook now. And if you're not on Facebook, you're a laggard, and you don't have to be a digital native. You just have to.
Although again, it's interesting you bring up Facebook, because there was a well-publicized in tech circle communities a few weeks ago this study about how a lot of teenagers don't use Facebook; they use Instagram as their social network. So.
And Tumblr as well.
Yeah, and Tumblr.
Things like Tumblr. Yeah.
And Tumblr's been around since.
But I guess it's interesting on Facebook alone. But I think the idea of communicating with people through the computer digitally and socializing that way is something that we don't as often get. So that's where that's kind of where I was getting with that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our next story about mobile location data, because this is pretty interesting. I didn't fingerprint. On a fingerprint, there are 12 different elements on your finger that if you have those 12 data points, they define you uniquely. Think about GPS. There are 7 or 8 or 11 satellites you need to sort of figure out where you are. Well, with mobile data, if you analyze all that mobile data, these scientists just came out and said, you only need 4 pieces of data that are time-stamped to figure out uniquely who you are. Seth, is there such a thing as anonymous data? I guess not, huh?
Not anymore.
Yeah. Do you care?
I care. Absolutely, I care.
Should we all care?
I think so. I think the era of... I think we're living in an era, the beginning of an era where your data is being converted into money. The bare facts of your life are being converted into money that you're not seeing. should we all be getting a cut of the money that's being made off of our data?
You know what's so funny to me though is that
I
like these studies will come out and it like will freak everyone out, right? So when Apple had Location Gate like 2 years ago, it freaked everyone out. At the same time, I'm willing to check in on Foursquare or tell you what I'm eating on Facebook, or very much willingly giving all this sort of data over on a very regular basis. So I think it's just sort of when it's thrown back in our face, like, oh, by the way, the government or Big Brother can track you with this, we sort of freak out for a minute. But at the same time, it's very abstract in that we do it all the time.
Exactly, and there's a famous quote, which I'm going to get totally wrong, but when I took marketing, it was like, there's no brand loyalty that exists that can withstand a 50-cent off coupon, right? So I give you 50-cent off coupon,
That's totally right.
You're going to buy the Charmin.
Well, that's the Gmail exchange, right? You give Google your access to your emails.
And you get the best damn email client out there.
Well, yeah,
I don't know,
or at least from
I'm
a
just
few years
giving
ago.
the Google point of view here, yes.
But the point is that now that we have these smartphones that can be tracked, and your behavior on them can be tracked very easily, your websites, the sites you visit, the apps you use, all this stuff is being tracked. This was a Path's big issue, right? With contacts. I think the issue is not necessarily that you can be tracked. It's what happens to that data once you have been tracked. So just because you can locate somebody after having 4 points of their routine on a path, and I think the story said that it's like 95% accurate. It's really what happens with that data. We all benefit from a certain amount of big data and big data collaboration.
Right, and there are benefits that accrue to us, absolutely.
Right. But how do we make sure that our personal privacy gets protected, that our rights to privacy are protected, and that stuff is I think what the real sort of underlying issue of all these privacy stories are about, because the law is so far behind what we really about what we need for our protection.
It's way behind.
Well, the other interesting thing I thought on this story was that, again, 4 data points, 95% of people can be tracked that way because we are basically creatures of habit. And we go to the same places all the time, do the same things all the time. So I think if you really want to muck with the system, do something different, right? Take a different way home. Go to a different bar.
Go to somebody else's
restaurant.
home.
Go to somebody else's home and spend the night. I encourage everyone to do that.
I'm trying that all the time.
But by doing things that are outside of our routine, you can actually throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in the system. So, because look, I'd rather do that than turn all my devices off. Because there's no way I'm turning off my smartphone, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm addicted.
But maybe just turn off your GPS, or what do you actually get out of using Foursquare?
Yeah. Well, it's debatable.
I get
how many
badges.
people- Yeah.
I love them badges. They're
Your
great.
mayorship, right?
Stinking badges. What was the last badge you got on Foursquare? Do you remember?
Oh my God, it was probably a coffee-related badge. That's where I work all the time in coffee shops, so I'm sure it was coffee mayor or something.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't that one of the big stories at South by this year? Was that Foursquare is going to move towards using?
Yeah. People don't care about badges anymore.
Yeah, it's location services for recommendation.
Right.
So they're going after Yelp.
I don't know. I still use Foursquare. I like it, but
Do you?
I use it when I'm on the road because
To do what?
well, I use it to connect to see if my friends are there.
Okay.
Less of them use it now, so there's less of that. But also the recommendations. There are nice tips that show up.
Interesting. Okay.
So we're going to go on to our next story, which is two stories together about data and giving data over to governments that are asking for it. First, there was Microsoft gives data when they get asked for it by governments and they're required to give it. And they were just transparent about what they gave and where it went. Which is an interesting snapshot. But the Twitter story was a little bit more interesting because a French court said there were a bunch of people that were using a hashtag that was racist and anti-Semitic. The French court asked for the names of the users who had been using that and posting these anti-Semitic comments. Twitter said no. They said it's $50 million. Because of that back and forth, Twitter said, look, we're US based. We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I think the laws are interesting, but the different countries and their different approaches to it are interesting as well. Mike, do you think companies should be forced to give up this data at all? And at what level and how?
Yeah. So Twitter is I cover Twitter on a regular basis. And so they're very interesting in that they will go to bat for their users in free speech to no end. Like, they're huge on First Amendment. They have this huge legal team. At the same time, in order to get out of getting bogged down in the court systems and sort of like having to turn over subpoenaed documents or tweets, they will try to abide by the letter of the law usually. So there was a German case as well where they censored tweets inside of Germany only because the German law, I think it was they forbade people to speak pro-Nazi tweets or something like that, right? So on the one hand, they'll be flexible in certain countries in terms of like abiding by their laws, but if you want to come over and sort of take that stuff from Twitter, take files, take certain names or things like that, they're going to fight that more aggressively.
Do you think they'd drop out of France rather than give the data up?
Oh God, I mean, if you give up data, it sets like these crazy precedents, you know, and they don't want to spend all like millions of dollars in court and like testifying or like turning documents over. That's a full-time job for their legal.
Yeah, quel dommage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How's that?
I'm impressed.
Seth, what do you think?
Well, you know where I stand on turning data over to governments and
you're totally for it. I can tell. You're the one who's backing up the bulldoze the government institutions.
I think it raises an interesting question of home country when it comes to tech companies. What country they're from, what the standards are of that country. There's not a lot of countries out there that have a First Amendment protection for speech. Or any kind of analog. So the fact that Twitter is U.S. based and does what it can to reflect that cultural difference, I think is real interesting because it winds up spreading the culture further around.
They're almost like there are no borders, but there are, right? I mean, we've got no borders for the internet, but we've got different laws in every country. I love the fact that Twitter is standing up for this. I think kudos to them for this, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, even though it's a terrible story, I mean, these guys are just totally racist.
But Google's solution to this problem was to pull Street View out of Germany. And what the Germans weren't expecting was that now there's a lot of German businesses that are complaining that they can't have their businesses found in Street View. You know, which goes back to what we were saying about we all benefit from big data, and you know, Street View at least is a big data issue. And so, what do you do when you pull out of it?
Right, unintended consequences
you lose
of it. All right, we got one more story, and this is in the vein of what were they thinking? I mean, you got to check this out. This is an Indian version of JWT, the Indian agency. They did a couple of ads for Ford. One that was going to run in the U.S., one in Italy, one apparently in Germany. And it's like, what were you thinking? This first one is a picture of this little Ford car, the Figo. And it's Silvio Berlusconi in front, some girls in the back. Silvio Berlusconi, if you don't remember, was known for his bunga parties, basically sex parties. And he's actually coming back, apparently, maybe to run Italy again, maybe. So there's that one. And then they went on, and for the U.S., I think this one. There's the Kardashians and Paris Hilton. I mean, tone deaf. And then the last one, I think these are some German race car drivers. I don't know that much about German race car personalities, but apparently they're those guys. But first of all, like, what were they thinking? I mean, and yeah, maybe India has some slightly different values, but they cracked values too, right, Mike?
I think marketers are sort of like trying to push the envelope as far as they can until like they get these sort of like backlashes and everyone's just like, what are you doing, basically, right? But like at the same time, it's like, how do you get people to care about your product when there's like a bajillion different ads for this stuff all the time, you know? So I mean, it's
well, it definitely stood out. It got Ford some attention. What do you think Ford should do, Seth? I mean, look at that.
Fire the agency.
Look at that. I mean, that's just
that's
just wrong at so many different levels.
Really bad.
I mean,
their tagline, by the way, is "Leave your worries behind with Figo's extra large boot."
Oh my God.
Oh boy. Well, so that one wasn't even aimed at the U.S.
I think this was a U.S. one.
Really?
The ads were aimed at Italy and the U.S. and I guess Germany, because none of us.
Have we started calling trunks boots? Is that what we're doing now? Is that just...
You're right.
But anyway, so
okay, maybe. But the story did say the U.S.
Yeah, it's probably going to wind up being very good for the ad agency because anybody who's going to want a risque ad will know that this one Indian agency does do risque. Ford, I hope, has fired them by now because tone deaf. I think as it applies to the internet, it's sort of an interesting question of, again, standards. What are standards? There was a time, maybe not even 15 years ago, where these ads, had they run, never would have been seen outside of that country, except maybe in Cracked magazine or some other, magazine that would focus on that kind of thing.
Yeah, the outcry would have been a lot less. The last question I have for this before we close here today is, there was a big outcry about the women, and I read about this online, a couple different stories. I had to dig deep to find the one with the guys in it. Is there a little bit of a double standard there?
That's
A
interesting.
little bit.
So you think there's a big double standard? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I think this appearing, especially now with, at least in the U.S., Sheryl Sandberg has her book coming out of like
Right.
pro-feminist lean in, and things like that. The timing was just like completely ridiculous. So I think people are more sensitive.
Not only that, but also the crimes against women going on in India right now.
Oh, yes, exactly.
There's something wrong there.
Yes.
And I think, again, this sort of gets back to what we were talking about with Twitter, what you were talking about, what we're talking about how the sort of the U.S. First Amendment, because we're located here, tends to filter around to the rest of the world.
Yep.
Maybe this is an example of, I'm not saying that we're perfect, but maybe, as we saw from the Python story, but maybe our attitudes towards women, which are a little bit more I'd say, appropriate, I'm American, than the rest of the world, maybe those will filter down too, and we won't see stories like this in the future.
Interesting.
I think we're going to be seeing stories like this for a long time.
Unfortunately, I think you're right. That's about all the time we have for this episode. I want to thank both Seth and Mike for showing up today and joining me. If you have questions or comments, you want to join in the discussion about these crazy ads or what happened at Python or any other stuff, do them down in the YouTube comments and we'll talk about it. Until next time, you've been watching Downloaded.